Well, I'm joined by Alex Story, ex-Olympian and former Conservative candidate, one of the leaders of the Bring Back Boris campaign, somebody who's been a member of the Conservative Party for decades. I think, Alex, you probably need a drink after the sort of news that we're getting over the last few days.
I definitely do.
And welcome to the programme. Boris Johnson, elected with a very big majority.
Yeah.
Helped, some might argue, by me and one or two others. But that's fine.
Yeah.
He got the majority. It was a very simple ticket. It was to get Brexit done.
Yeah.
Now, I had pretty grave reservations about the deal. But in the end, I thought, well, we've pushed this so far that at least if we can reverse the status quo, that's better than nothing. And Boris did all of that. But in the end, and I know you've been an ardent supporter of him, and you've been involved with that campaign with Lord Cruddas and David Campbell Bannerman and others when you wanted him to stay, you wanted him to be reinstated. Isn't the truth of it that he's a very good cheerleader, he's a very good campaigner, but he wasn't a very good governor?
Well, I think he wasn't a great Prime Minister. I think in terms of a Conservative point of view, we all agree that he wasn't really Conservative in any particular way. My reason for wanting Boris back was not to do with his competence as a Prime Minister. It was essentially the principle of what elections and democracy means.
OK, so the country had voted for him.
That's right. And I wanted the people of this country to decide and pass judgment on what he delivered, rather than a small clique of people who were invested in his downfall. And the reason why I was for this bringing Boris back was simply because I believe the ballot box to be sacrosanct. And I think the moment you start to tinker with it and allow disgruntled MPs or commentators or special interest groups to interfere with that process, what you have is the dismantling of democracy as we know it. Because what you do is that you're imparting power to the powerful and you're disenfranchising the rest of the country.
Very interesting point of view. No, it is a very interesting point of view. And I'm just sort of thinking, well, actually, Boris went, and look where we are now.
Well, that's the point.
So do you justify that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like I should be called Alec Cassandra, like the guy who was telling people what the troubles would be. And the question is, the core thing is about legitimacy. In the democratic world in which we live, we bestow on the leader, the political leader of a country, the ability to govern because he won an election process. He went through the process, he campaigned, people gave him their vote, and it's up to the electorate to judge whether the person is competent or not.
Unless he or she breaks the law or...
Well, there are all sorts of ways. I mean, we know that there is a bit of a rigging game going on. I think what we saw is an extraordinary amount of energy being put on this Partygate scandal, so-called scandal. But the reason why I didn't really buy this is because we had a local election in 2022 in May, where the Conservative Party, with Boris at the helm, actually didn't do that badly, given that the Tory Party had been in power for 12 years. And after that, he won a vote of no confidence. And it's because a small group of MPs pushed him and said, we will change the rules to get you out, that he resigned. And that, for me, was the breach of trust. That's when...
Yes, so whether he's a good PM or bad PM, whether he's honest or not particularly honest, whether he partied or not, as far as you're concerned, he should be judged by the British people.
Well, he should be judged by the...
I completely understand that. I mean, when you hear stories about, virtually fighting going on in the lobby tonight, more resignations, I mean... This lot don't deserve to be in government, do they?
Well, I think what we see now is the true face of the Conservative Party. I think what we now realise is that the Conservative Party, at its core, was command and control centre for the EU. In other words, they were the EU's representatives within the UK. We see this because of the ruthlessness with which all Brexiters are being dealt with. We've come to the point where the establishment, the pro-EU establishment, has decided that they've lost patience with the electorate. Democracy no longer matters for them. And in many ways, if the Labour Party comes in, we will have more of the same. That's the interesting thing in my view, is that if you're pro-EU, if you're hell-bent on keeping us in a supranational organisation like the EU, the fact that the Labour Party will win is a bonus for you, because you know it's going to be an acceleration.
It wouldn't be that different, would it, from Jeremy Hunt being in charge?
But this is the point. The point is that actually what we now realise is that, and in fact, if we are critical of the Conservative Party since 2010, we've only had left-leaning policies implemented. We didn't have, I mean, quasi-quad.
So you as a, you know, as we said at the start of this discussion, decades you've been in the party, you've stood for them in general elections, you came very, very close.
Yeah.
A couple of thousand votes away from winning a seat in Wakefield. You then would have become an MEP, but for the UKIP surge. I'm sorry about that.
Well, no, actually, I did become an MEP, but that's when I realised that the Tory party was completely corrupt, because, as you know, I don't know if you remember, it's an indicative story. I was the canary in the coal mine in this kind of loss of patience with Brexiters, because I was called when Tim Kirkhope went to the House of Lords.
That's when you...
Exactly.
Yeah.
I then, the returning officer said, this is now your seat, are you willing and able?
Yeah.
And Tory Party Central just said, we can't have Alex, so we'll put John Proctor. And John Proctor was a non-entity that didn't win any votes.
So you were wiped out by the party, basically.
Exactly, and not just that, I then went to court, and the judge... possibly with an eye to the House of Lords, sided with the party against the electorate.
So you're now done with them?
Well, the point is, I'm a Conservative, but my views are not represented in the Conservative Party.
After all these years?
Well, no, but in fact, if I'm honest, I realised in 2007 and 2006 that the Conservative Party, in particular with Cameron, was drifting very, very far to the left. They brought in, as you might remember, the A-list. In other words, it was chums and people who kind of ticked all the right woke boxes.
People like Liz Truss.
Exactly. People who were actually Lib Dems, and we had an influx of people who had never knocked on a door, who hadn't actually discovered who the people of this country actually were. My greatest discovery when I started door knocking, and this was the thing I really, really liked about politics, was to get to know my people. I realized that all the theories and economic theories or financial theories that I'd learned at university meant zero on the doorstep. And I realized I knew nothing. And the only reason why I became a so-called small C Conservative is because I started in Denton and Reddish, very close to Oldham and south of Manchester. And the more I knocked on doors, the more I realised, and you knew this because UKIP was essentially that kind of reservoir of votes.
Yeah.
These people were not socialists. They were all small C Conservative. They were all patriots. They all wanted the police to be fair. If a crime was committed, the criminal should be arrested and the victim should be protected. All these things are the things that you discover on doorsteps. And my actual optimism for the future is that I know, and we saw that when the Queen passed away, there's an enormous amount of reservoir.
It's still there, isn't it?
Well, it's not just still there. We saw it overwhelmingly for the 10 days when we had the Queen's passing, all the celebrations around it, the proclamation of a new king. We realised that there is no or very few Republicans in this country. We know that everybody in this country, most people, are attached to the institutions of this state. It's just that we have a very small number of people who want to change the things.
So what happens now? I mean, you know, I've been arguing for the last 3 days that given this coup that has taken place, and I can't use any other word.
No, it is a coup.
I never thought I'd use that word. I thought that was for conspiracy theorists and people online, and I never thought I'd use it, but I am. And we need something new now, don't we?
Well, the Tory party currently is gone. There is no such thing as a Conservative Party. But in many ways, as I was trying to explain, it was gone a long time ago. But it's it's taken...
I think that's right.
But the exciting thing is that we, since Brexit, live in an era of revelation. Things have become so much clearer because beforehand, the Conservative Party, including people like William Hague, could triangulate, pretend that they were mildly Eurosceptic. And after that,
they weren't.
When it came down to it, they all revealed themselves to be Remainers. They all sided with international versus domestic considerations. And this is where the Conservative Party has chosen to die. Well,
I think they probably will. The other Alex story, of course, we must talk about is the athlete, the rower. Now, how tall are you?
I'm 6'8".
6'8". Is that not slightly on the tall and large side for a rower?
No. I mean, that's par for the course.
Is it really?
I'm officially a giant, which is very disappointing for my children's mates, because when I was a kid, I have 4 children, when they were small, I used to say, your dad's officially a giant. So they'd go to school and say, my dad's a giant. And then there'd be a row of children knocking on my door, and they'd go, But your dad's you're a liar. Your dad's not a giant. He's not green. But it's completely useless in normal life. But I wouldn't change it for anything else.
And you got a blue. You're in the Olympics.
Yeah.
Rowing, a very demanding sport.
Well, we used to do 6 to 7 hours a day of training, and
a day,
and so
that as amateurs.
As amateurs, yeah. And so I remember meeting a rugby blue, and he said, a guy called Connor, and he said to me, do you know, when we used to go out at Cambridge, the girls used to say, where are the rowing blues? And the girls and the rugby guys used to say, well, they're not here. Because we're the warrior monks of sports. We train very early in the morning, we train in the afternoon, we go to bed before 10. And so, of course, we always see the girls at their best. The rugby players see them in a much more...
Yeah. And British rowing had a wonderful couple of decades.
Yeah. Well, we had. Very few people have gone through the hardship of rowing, but to make it even worse, we had an East German called Jürgen Grobler, whose English was relatively strained, but who made us work a great deal. I mean, you know from Steve Redgrave, Matthew Pints, and all these guys, we worked extremely hard, and in a sense, we always did it just because of the glory of potentially winning that gold medal. It wasn't pay, it wasn't anything else, but it was one of these things that I did.
So the real Olympic ideal. Yeah,
it's the only sport where there's no money. Unfortunately, it's being attacked by gender politics at the moment. There was a decision 2 weeks ago for men to compete against women, and I think that's completely outrageous. But this is the kind of world we live in, and at some stage. And it's in our politics as well. How is it that we've come to a point when somebody who's 6'8", who at the age of nearly 50 could take on the ladies' Olympic? I mean, it's completely insane.
It's completely ridiculous. Well, let's hope rowing manages to stay free of some of that. And I've no doubt you're going to continue on your political journey and maybe find a home in the end. And Alex, thank you.
My pleasure.
And thanks for explaining what that Bring Back Boris campaign was all about. I find that really interesting.
My pleasure.